This is Special Prosecutor Larry Klayman.
I'm the only lawyer ever to obtain a court ruling that a president of the United States committed a crime.
For truth, for competition.
As a young lawyer, I helped break up AT&T. That's why you have all your cell phones today.
For sovereignty, for the Republic.
I'm the guy who, at Judicial Watch, which I founded, uncovered the Chinagate scandal. Millions of dollars going to the Clinton campaign, corrupting our political system.
For the privacy of citizens.
And I'm the only guy to have enjoined the National Security Agency from mass surveillance on hundreds of millions of Americans.
Tearing it up.
I'm the son of meat packers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I know how to slice and dice.
Bringing it back.
We're going to take this country apart and put it back together again in the way envisioned by our founding fathers.
It's not just talk.
We're not just regurgitating news stories. Larry Klayman, Special Prosecutor, is making the news.
And now, here's Larry.
Welcome to this week's edition of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. This is a week that will live in infamy of this country. Much like the attack on Pearl Harbor, the evil Democrat prosecutors have again attacked President Trump. By attacking him, they're attacking all of us. Completely sham, travesty, you name it, indictments brought in the state of Georgia. I've spent time in Georgia myself, went to Emory Law School. Unbelievable. Atlanta is much different than it was today. It's much different today than it was when I went to law school there. It's highly leftist. Trump has been indicted. He will be taken in front of a hanging jury in Georgia. Radicals of every variety. It's a leftist city at this point. This is obviously an example of the complete corruption on the federal level in particular, but here you have it on a state level of our justice system. It's why the American people need to rise up. It's why we need to declare independence again. You can see the hat I'm wearing because a few years ago in July, from July 5th to 9th at at Independence Hall, which should be City Hall, in the city that once was brotherly love, which now is the city of brotherly hate and homicide, my native city of Philadelphia, we held a Third Continental Congress with delegates discussing whether we should declare independence or not. The time has come to do it again. This country has no legal system that will protect the rights of the American people. Yes, John and Jane Doe in a case involving, division of property or whatever the case may be might get a fair hearing, but you're not going to get one anymore. And we have an example later on in the show I'm going to talk about as well, dealing with the January 6th defendants, because the deck is stacked. President Trump obviously was indicted on several counts. So were a number of his lawyers. So were a number of his political counselors. And then they took a mugshot. Now, at first I thought when I saw the mugshot that there must be a number of copies of that mugshot. And they displayed one and they disclosed one that made Trump look angry and mad. But now I understand that perhaps this was an idea of one of his brilliant political advisors to make him look that way. That's unfortunate. This is not the ball game. It's not the be all and end all, the mugshot. But whoever has been advising President Trump and defending him all these years, frankly, has done less than a good job. He never was strong enough in the beginning when he was president. He was illegally surveilled by the deep state, by the intelligence agencies, though lawsuits were brought. He never pushed back on the Russian witch hunt of Robert Mueller, as I did for Dr. Jerome Corsi when we sued Mueller. Corsi was the only one who wasn't indicted in that case involving Roger Stone. Roger Stone was indicted and he was convicted ultimately and then pardoned. But the best defense is a good offense. And Trump never seems to wage it. And then he always reverts back to the Republican establishment, for instance, Kevin McCarthy. At the same time that Trump is now subject to 4 indictments on 91 criminal counts, believe that, 91, with a likely indictment coming in Arizona as well that will look similar to the Georgia indictment. He has 2 civil suits. He's facing 6 to 8 trials during this election period. He will likely win the primary, the Republican primary, But it's going to be very, very difficult to win a general election when you face all of that in terms of time and expense and the smear jobs that are coming. And when you see what's happening to him, as opposed to the way our so-called corrupt government treats Joe Biden and Hunter Biden and James Biden, and for that matter, Anthony Fauci, all of whom we have tried. Now, we have convictions against Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, and James Biden, and we have a sentencing on August 29th. That's coming up very, very soon. And I'm convinced that the citizens judge will mete out jail time. And then we will petition law enforcement and the military to carry out those convictions and the sentences and to arrest Joe Biden. As I've said before, in 48 states, including the District of Columbia, if you know if someone has committed a felony, you can arrest them and turn them over to government authorities. Now, we have gone beyond that. We have convictions, and these were fairly tried. And we gave the Bidens notice. We said you can come and defend yourself. You can plead innocent, guilty, nolo contendere. They're getting another opportunity on August 29th also to defend themselves. The people have a right to mete out justice themselves, just as our founding fathers did when King George III took our legal system away from us. And that's what we see. We see that our legal system has been hijacked by a bunch of criminals, these Democrat prosecutors and these vile special counsels that are indicting Trump, trying to destroy him and thereby destroy you. The one I'm referring to in particular is Jack Smith, who Trump calls deranged. Yes, he does look deranged. He looks like Manson. I mean, this is unbelievable that these people are even in power in any way. But what do you have on the Republican side? You have a bunch of fools, court jesters, running around like chickens without their heads on. They, ironically, want Biden to stay in office because they want to beat him up. They want to just weaken him. That's what they did during the Clinton period. The impeachment was designed only to weaken Clinton to the point that Al Gore could not be elected. And of course, on the flip side, the irony is that the Democrat establishment and the left is now the entity that wants Biden gone. You can now see that the New York Times and Washington Post are digging up information about the Bidens, which shows their culpability. But no one wants to bring about justice with regard to the Bidens. Certainly, the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, could care less. He simply says, oh, we're going to keep considering impeachment inquiries over and over and over again. He says that, but nothing happens. James Comer of the Government Oversight and Reform Committee, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. They look like fools. They look like the court jesters they are. Because as Trump is totally destroyed, Biden walks around, of course, he doesn't walk very well, and he barely knows where he is, with a Cheshire grin, knowing that he can't be touched because he controls the Justice Department. That's where we are, ladies and gentlemen, fellow patriots. That's why you need a Freedom Watch. That's why you need a Larry Klayman. That's why you need someone who is fearless, who will do what needs to be done within the bounds of ethics and the law, and not just the law of man, but the law of God. That's who we live by, the 10 Commandments. This is an imperative that needs to be carried out, just as our founding fathers did in the days, months, and years leading up to 1776. We need to do it for ourselves. The colonialists and the founding fathers tried to reason with King George. He was not receptive, just like the Republican Party is not receptive to universal calls to even impeach Joe Biden for his crimes. They won't do it because they want to leave him dangling in office, hoping that they will win the next election. Well, this is another segue to what we saw this week in the presidential debate on Fox News. Now, Fox News shamelessly promoted this debate, obviously to boost their own ratings. But what we saw on that debate stage are not the people who are going to be nominated for the Republican presidential contest in November of 2024. That's going to be Donald Trump. So this was just simply an entertainment, an exercise with regard to some of these people. Now, some of them, even though they're establishment and they're not my cup of tea, I like DeSantis, I like Trump, and I like Nikki Haley. She's establishment. I think she established herself very well. But then we had this clown, Rashwami, whatever his name, Rafsanjani. That was the name of the Iranian foreign minister in the hostage crisis many years ago under President Carter. I mean, the guy's a clown. That's what he is. And he was laughing like the Joker. He's obviously an intelligent guy, but he's not ready for prime time. They're right about that. The guy is voted only twice in his entire life. All of a sudden, he's a billionaire, so he wants to throw the money around and become president of the United States. And he says dumb things, such as, let's give Taiwan away to China. Or I don't care what happens in Ukraine. Well, you got to care what happens in Ukraine, because even though we should never be in that war, because if Biden was stronger up front, we wouldn't be there. The fact is that Vladimir Putin wants to reconstitute the Soviet Union. It'll be just like the Third Reich with Adolf Hitler. First, he takes Ukraine, then he takes Poland, then he takes Lithuania, then he takes Belarus, even though he has control of that. But you can't let this continue. And we need people who have some experience. We don't need career politicians. I agree with Vivek. He's right. These people were bought and paid for on the stage. There's no question about that. And certainly it was entertaining. And what's interesting is that after the debate, everybody thought that Vivek won. Everybody thought that Nikki Haley came in second. But in a poll a few days later by the Washington Post, it turns out that Governor DeSantis had actually won by a fairly wide margin, because people were able to discern, what was genuine, what was sincere, what wasn't just simply a reaction to try to get votes. But it also points out, watching these, frankly, pygmies that were up on the stage compared to Donald Trump, that there's really no one in charge of the Republican Party. Nobody. Maybe Fox News is. And of course, they're two-faced. But this is why we need to rise up ourselves. It's why the American people need to join Freedom Watch. Go to freedomwatchusa.org. Support our citizens' grand juries, our citizens' trials, our right to mete out justice ourselves peacefully and legally. Get my book, It Takes a Counter-Revolution, Wake Up America. See my manifesto for trying to save the country. And if you have ideas, please email me at leclayman@gmail.com. Be part of the solution, not part of the problem. I'll be right back with more of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. Again, go to freedomwatchusa.org and contribute with tax-deductible contributions. We need more lawyers. We need more paralegals. We need more office space. We are your Justice Department. Stay tuned. We're back. I was hoping to have a guest. I hope he'll be available. I hope he wasn't kidnapped. Siaka Massaquoi. He's, of course, the Black actor who we represent. His case was in front of the Ninth Circuit. His house was raided, even though he was peaceful on January 6th at the Capitol, barely put his foot through the door. He didn't really enter into the Capitol at all. But he was raided. 20 plus FBI agents busted into his house. We've talked about that before. He was handcuffed in front of his best friend who had his young children there. He asked to talk to a lawyer. Presumably that would have been me. He was denied that opportunity. And they worked him over and took his computer and all of his equipment, which he needs because he's an accomplished writer and actor and producer. You need that to make a living. And to this day, he's never gotten it back. He filed at the time, pro se, a complaint in Los Angeles, California, that was predictably dismissed by leftist judges. And we took it up to the Ninth Circuit. I'm a member of the Ninth Circuit. I represented him there. And the issue is it was a violation not just of his First Amendment rights, but his Fourth Amendment rights, a violation of improper search and seizure. Well, the matter went up to the Ninth Circuit. First, they said they would have an oral argument, then they canceled it. And then this week, they issued their decision, and they write on top of it, not for publication. That means we can't use it as precedent. The decision is completely intellectually dishonest. The judges who ruled on this were appointed by Joe Biden, by Barack Obama, and by Jimmy Carter, no less, ultra-leftists. And they basically said, well, you really can't pursue your claim because you could have filed a complaint with the Inspector General of the Justice Department that you didn't exhaust your legal remedies. You can't bring a Bivens case against Christopher Wray of the FBI and the Department of Justice for violating constitutional rights. They knew that was wrong, which is why they said not for publication, because they didn't want it to be used as precedent. And this is where we are. You see, this is where we are in our legal system. We're going to talk about that in the next segment too. These federal judges in particular do what they want. They think they're above the law. They are above the law as far as the way the law is enforced, because no one holds them accountable. They simply were protecting the Justice Department, and they are part of that establishment. Of course, the Justice Department now is controlled by Joe Biden and his leftist goons, Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, and Christopher Wray, the Director of the FBI. This is really tragic, and I'm going to talk about the mechanism to deal with judges in our next segment. But where's Jim Jordan? You know, I'm very critical of him. Frankly, he gets on my nerves. He's the head of the House Judiciary Committee, always has rolled up sleeves, Mr. Tough Guy, you know, very glib. You know, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Well, I can't stand to listen to the guy anymore. I really can't. I can't stand to listen to any of them, because Jim Jordan, as the head of the Judiciary Committee, could be hauling these judges, these lawless judges that are throwing January 6th peaceful protesters in prison, having them make forced confessions, you know, judges of the Ninth Circuit that make a totally intellectually dishonest decision. At a minimum, he could be calling them to testify in front of the Judiciary Committee, and many of them should simply be impeached. In 200 and some years after we became a nation with the Declaration of Independence, we've only impeached 8 judges, most of them either for drunkenness or not showing up or whatever the case may be. The last one that was impeached, one of the last ones, Alice C. Hastings, was impeached for taking bribes. And he then ran for the Senate, for the Congress in Miami, and won. And he was there ever since, until he died, you know, in the last few years. So this is a serious problem. Without a legal system, which, number one, treats people fairly, which, number two, actually metes out justice, which isn't in the hip pocket of the establishments of both political parties, we are left defenseless as an American people. And that is the rationale for our citizens' grand juries, for our citizens' trials, because if we don't do it, no one will do it. What do you do short of a violent revolution when you don't have a legal system that stands in the stead of the American people? So I do want you to go to freedomwatchusa.org, contribute to our cause with tax-deductible contributions. We are your Justice Department, and get my book, It Takes a Counter-Revolution, Wake Up America. I'll be back. In the meantime, pray for this country, because without a justice system that metes out justice, particularly to the powerful, the rich and powerful, we are a country which will not last much longer. I'll be right back. I had hoped to have Siaka Massaquoi on. Perhaps he got sidetracked, but I want to tell you, this is a fine gentleman. He's been on before. He doesn't deserve that treatment. None of the January 6th defendants deserve that treatment. Watch what we do next week. It's going to be very significant. We're going to up the ante with the government with a new class action lawsuit. And we're not done. We're taking Siaka's case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And that's a very expensive proposition. Even just printing is expensive at the Supreme Court. So please go to freedomwatchusa.org and contribute to our cause. And then coming down the line shortly, and I'm convinced that this will happen, will be the conviction of Anthony Fauci, Dr. Mengele, as we call him. You remember who Dr. Mengele was? That was Hitler's doctor who experimented on Jews and gypsies and retarded people. That's exactly what happened during COVID. This was an experiment, these vaccines. And he was, of course, the big proponent behind them. Many people believe that he profited personally from them with kickbacks from the pharmaceutical companies. But Fauci was also the person who gave the seeds of COVID-19, the SARS virus, to the communist Chinese laboratory, which is known to be a bioweapons lab. Now, we filed a lawsuit in Dallas, Texas. We've been trying to serve the Chinese ever since. We will succeed. That will eventually go forward. But more importantly, Fauci himself is as culpable as the Chinese for killing over 10 million people worldwide and counting. And he walks away scot-free. Now, I was listening to that presidential debate the other night, and I think it was one of the parties that said that he should be fired. That was DeSantis. Firing's not enough. This man needs to be convicted, sentenced, and put away for life for what he did. He has now killed more people than Adolf Hitler did during the Holocaust. He can claim it's negligent homicide. That's what he was indicted for. But I suspect that a jury could have also found, or a judge could have also found, that this was reasonably foreseeable, in effect, intentional on his part. The guy is like the devil, and he walks off scot-free. But that's typical of our entire government system today. And this is why we need a new government and not a new nation. It's why we need honest people running our government, not politicians. And Vivek was correct about one thing. Everybody on that stage was bought and paid for except for him. Yeah, the lobbyists, they got their hooks into everyone. And they got their hooks into the Trump judges. That's how they got to be on the bench. They don't even defend President Trump when it comes to meting out justice. So this is something I want you to keep in mind as we go forward, because it's not just the Bidens, it's not just Fauci, it's not just Robert Mueller, who we are also trying. It's not just federal judges who violate their oath of office and put people away in prison because the establishment wants these people to go to prison, like the January 6th peaceful protesters. And it's not just core criminals in state and local governments. These federal prosecutors and state prosecutors are prosecuting Trump, just as one example, for political purposes. That's against their oath of office, just like the judges who are putting the peaceful protesters in prison. This is criminal, and they should be held accountable. We, the American people, don't have a lot of time left. I've been saying that over and over again. And DeSantis was right about many, many things in that debate. We are in a decline. We don't want to hear it's morning in America again. We don't want to hear Vivek, Rafsanjani, or whatever his name is, tell us that everything is great. No, things aren't great. And the American people, our listeners, our supporters, they're great. But most of the American people, frankly, are lazy. Most of the American people don't pay attention to what's going on. Most of the American people vote on the basis of who looks good rather than who actually can get the job done. Most of the American people want to go off and play sports or drink, party, carry on. Most of the American people think that it's going to be okay and it'll just go away. But it won't go away. It won't go away unless we make a sacrifice. You know, I've heard people in and around me, as I've said many times, say, Larry, why don't you just retire? I can't retire. How can I do that in good conscience? How can I do that with regard to all the children in this country and the future generations? How can you walk off and just say, okay, you know, I'll be dead in 20 years, so I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to have fun. Well, you know what? The people in Ukraine of my age and others, they wanted to retire too. It's not working for them. People in Israel, for instance, have to stay on alert 24/7, every minute of every day, or they won't have a country. You could cut Israel in half in just a few hours if you weren't vigilant. It's only 12 miles in the center from the Red Sea and the Mediterranean to hostile Arab countries. Same thing is true for Saudi Arabia. If it's not vigilant, it'll go down the drain because ISIS and Al-Qaeda want to destroy them, the royal family. It's not just Jews, it's Arabs, it's Christians, it's everyone. We all must stay vigilant, and we all must fight for what is right, and we must be prepared to make a sacrifice. We cannot just sit there and do nothing and be entertained. And that's what really got under my skin with regard to the Fox debates. It was presented as entertainment. In fact, many of the Fox commentators said, get some popcorn and watch. Well, it's not that easy. It's not that simple. And without a justice system, that will protect the American people, then we're in the streets. Then we're in a violent revolutionary mode, which I don't want to see. And that is why you must go to Freedom Watch. You must support what we do. Read our website, read my lips, read my book. It takes a counter-revolution. Wake up, America. Because if you care about your kids and grandkids and future generations, if you care about yourself, you just can't sit there and party on. So, as I always say, that's where we are, ladies and gentlemen. And I know sometimes I sound like a broken record, but advertising is repetitive. Until it sinks into the American people what we're dealing with, until we understand that we have a brain-dead criminal of a so-called president who was fraudulently elected. Yes, he was. Trump is right about that. There's not that many votes flip overnight to that degree. Nobody believes the government anymore. It's like lawyers, and government is mostly comprised of lawyers. I'm the anti-lawyer as a lawyer. The joke is if a lawyer is moving his mouth, he must be lying. What happens if you get into a crisis? If you get into the potential for a nuclear war with China or with Russia or with Iran or North Korea? Can you believe the president anymore? Can you believe what the government tells you? You can't. And now there's a push so they can keep total control over us, that the government now, again, our so-called government, wants to have us wear masks to be quarantined. They say COVID's coming back. Other diseases are coming back. This is for control. Because if the American people are put in a fearful mode, they are hoping that they will obey their master as slaves. Well, that's exactly what happens frequently. And the American people need to get educated, and that's important with regard to our citizens' grand juries and our citizens' trials. If nothing else, it tells the American people that our future lies in our own hands. It tells the American people that just as we did in 1776, we must rise up. It tells the American people that we have God-given rights, because when in the course of human events, the sovereign no longer represents the people, we have a right under the laws of nature and nature's God to alter or abolish that government and to form a new government by and for the people with equal rights for everyone in pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. So that's what we must do. And we must do it for ourselves, because we can't even depend on our religious institutions to do us for it. We do it for us. Yes, belief in God, the divine providence got us through the first American Revolution. But whether it's the Catholic Church, whether it's the Jewish church, you call it a church or a synagogue or whatever, whether it's the Muslim religion or whatever it may be, Hindu, Buddhism, whatever, these established religious institutions are abdicating their responsibility too. Look at the Pope who's a communist. He has no problem with what's going on today. He has no problem with homosexuality. He doesn't rail against pushing perverted ideologies on kids and sex changes. He's a politician like the rest, and the other organized religions are the same. So you need to find faith in your own heart. You need to go direct to God. You don't need intermediaries. You don't need priests. You don't need rabbis. You don't even need ministers. You need to go yourself direct. And I've told this story before. You can read about it in one of the books I wrote, War is Wine, How I Came to Fight the Establishment, is that Jesus has come to me on more than one occasion when I was down and out, when I was going through a difficult period. And he said, Larry, clear your head out. You're working for me now. It is time for you, the American people, to work for the Father and the Son. And if we remain true to that, then he will be there for us. But how can he be there for us when this country condones, as just one example, the killing of millions of unborn babies of his creation? How can he be there for us when we condone crime? Thou shalt not steal in the Ten Commandments. How can he be there for us when we condone cheating on one's wife, girlfriend, or boyfriend? How can he be there for us when there's no such thing as right or wrong anymore? You just can lie. Thou shalt not lie. Every one of these politicians lies. Kevin McCarthy, the Speaker of the House, lies. Joe Biden lies. And I'll tell you something, based on my experience in Washington, D.C., I would say 90% of our elected representatives are trading their influence, just like Joe Biden did. Not to that degree, not with regard to hundreds of millions of dollars, for sure. But this is not new. I have never, for instance, gone to lunch with a congressman or a congresswoman who's taken 1 penny out of their pocket to pay for lunch. You're actually allowed to pay for their lunch, and they sit there waiting for you to pull out your credit card. That's what's happened. We no longer are in control of our own destiny or our country unless we rise up, unless we put our foot down, unless we are prepared to take risks, unless we recognize that this country is virtually gone and on its back. Look around, fellow patriots. Gasoline now close to $5 in most states. If you go out to California, it's over $6. In some parts of Beverly Hills, for instance, it's $8. San Francisco, others. You've got rampant crime. In California, you can steal up to $950 and not pay any consequence. People can do smash and grabs in stores, and security guards don't take any action. They just watch. The people walk off. Our borders, terrorists, drug traffickers, human traffickers running across our borders, fentanyl killing our people, our children being turned into perverts behind the backs of parents, our military very much demoralized, recognizing that, frankly, we haven't won a war since World War II. We have sacrificed a lot of lives, and we honor our brave heroes. But I'll tell you something. As someone who had to go to war in Vietnam, but I was actually relieved of that at the last minute by Richard Nixon when he ended the draft, and I saw how many people died, 55,000 people died, I would have gone. But I probably would have been dead because politicians wanted to fight a useless war. We'll be right back with the verdict section of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman, but take what I'm saying to heart. I'm not as articulate today as usual. I have a little walking pneumonia. I've had it for several weeks, but I want you to reflect on what's going on, and in particular, listen to the verdict. I'll be right back. Stay tuned and go to freedomwatchusa.org and contribute to our cause with tax-deductible contributions. We are your Justice Department. And now the verdict, fellow patriots, people of faith, those who believe in the vision and creation of our founding fathers. President Trump is exactly right. I don't tell people who to vote for, but frankly, I'll wink at you and I wouldn't mind if he won. And when he does win, if he wins, if he gets past the primary, which he likely will, in a general election, that'll be a miracle. God will have to help him in that regard with all they're doing to him at this point in time. Let's hope that he's learned his lesson, because one of the Donald's weaknesses, okay, and he has many strengths, is that he always defaults back to the Republican establishment. Kevin McCarthy, who after January 6th wanted to have him impeached or removed under the 25th Amendment, is, quote, now his great friend, and others as well. They will stab him in the back. And that is why we need more political parties. We need more competition. We need people who are willing to serve based upon their principles, not recognizing that they could use their influence and make a lot of money coming into Congress poor and going out as multi-millionaires. We need a revival. We need to get down on our knees and pray to God that we can join forces of the people in this country, that we can bring them and educate them. And that's why I want you, go to our website at freedomwatchusa.org, get the press release that I sent out with regard to the conviction of Joe Biden. Let everybody know about the sentencing on August 29th. I want you to watch at Freedom Watch's YouTube channel and at freedomwatchusa.org. Spread it far and wide with your friends and colleagues and anyone you know. Because one of the things that caused the colonies to coalesce in the days, months, and years leading up to 1776 were the pamphleteers. The people were educated. They had to understand why they had to declare independence and why they had to defend themselves when King George III and his monarchy declared war on us. The war has been declared on American people, particularly conservatives and people of faith. You can see the lawyers who are being prosecuted today are conservative Republican activists. I have been fighting bar associations, or at least one in DC, for many years. They want to eliminate all conservative lawyers. This is the most left-leaning place in this country. The District of Columbia is a vile, disgusting, more than a swamp. It's a cesspool of leftist control and corruption. Whether it's Rudy Giuliani, Kellyanne Conway, Senator Ted Cruz, Senator Josh Hawley, Professor John Eastman, whether it's Sidney Powell, whether it's Larry Klayman, or whether it's others, they don't want there to be conservative advocates to stand up for our principles to try to solve things peacefully and legally. They want to take that away from us. So that's why you also need to go to freedomwatchusa.org, because we are there for the few activist, conservative, Republican attorneys. And it's not so much Republican, they just happen to be registered Republican. I'm a conservative. I'm not a Republican like this Republican Party is at all. A corrupt bunch of thieves who give you false promises, raise money fraudulently, only to do nothing once they're reelected. Now, there are a few good ones, like Lauren Boebert, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, some that actually are sincere, but they can't do anything because the establishment has a noose around their necks. Well, we don't need this government. You can take it, and excuse the French, and shove it. Because we didn't need King George III. We didn't need the Tories in 1776 that were sympathetic to the monarchy. We rose up ourselves, and we need to do that again. And the best vehicle that you have to do that peacefully and legally is Freedom Watch. There are other public interest groups that get documents and crow about it and say, okay, look what I found. Or there's congressmen who prance around Capitol Hill saying, guess what I figured out? But no one pulls the trigger, figuratively speaking. I'm not talking about violently. You at Freedom Watch, and yours truly, we pull the trigger peacefully and legally. We're not afraid. We cannot be afraid. Jesus was not afraid. You know, when he stood there next to Pontius Pilate, there's a great scene in Passion of the Christ, and Pontius Pilate says, gee, just admit that you're not the Son of God and everything will be great. And Jesus says, you can take that and you know what? He says, I don't listen to you. I only listen to the Father. And that's all you should be listening to. And that is why I want you to join what we're doing at Freedom Watch, because that's who we listen to. And that's all we listen to. We don't listen to politicians, corrupt judges, and others. I'll be back next week with another edition of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. Until then, remember, the Father and Son will only help us if we help ourselves. Thank you for listening to me.